Mind Body Life show hosted by Frederick Entenmann on Global Voice Radio on Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern. During his show, Mind Body Life founder and best-selling author Frederick Entenmann investigates the little-known insights and daily methods used to create explosive life transformations and transitions with those that have risen from struggle and ascended to greatness. Here is your Mind Body Life host, Frederick Entenmann.
Welcome to the Mind Body Life show. I'm your host, Frederick Entenmann. I'm a former professional athlete. I'm a best-selling author of Surviving Sports and the Game of Life, a coach and consultant. I help professional athletes win the game of life. I want to welcome you to episode 14, and I'm going to deconstruct of what makes a good coach. As a sports-dominant society, and as sports-dominant as our society has become, I want you to know this can really relate to any leadership role in some degree, because after all, great coaching is really tremendous teaching, and it involves leadership and emotional quotient and so on and so forth. Anyway, before I discuss what qualities and skill sets that make for a good coach, I want to first, let's acknowledge how very difficult this profession of coaching really is. Okay, it's coaching sometimes a thankless, frustrating, no-win kind of job, and it's an occupation that's most often done in a public fishbowl. In other words, if you coach, then you're in a highly visible position that continually exposes you to the public scrutiny and evaluation. And it's one of those professions where the general public regularly weighs in on what kind of a job they think you're doing, whether you want to hear their evaluation or not. And with today's social media and overall reach, it's nuts how fast information, whether that's good or bad, can reach anybody at any given time. So the pressure cooker's never been as hot. When it comes to judging your job performance, everyone seems to have an expert and have the so-called qualifications to criticize you, whether it be fans or parents or students, alumni, again, the media, and the team's organization or administration, that all seem at the ready to offer you either a thumbs up or thumbs down signal. And what's even more frustrating for a coach is I think that so much of this external judgment comes from individuals who don't even seem to have a clue about you or your players or what you're trying to accomplish with the team. Coaching is also one of those jobs where your professional effectiveness is almost always narrowly measured by something that's very often totally out of your control, and that's winning and losing. And in many ways, you could be a bad or ineffective coach. And trust me when I say I have experienced bad and ineffective coaching. Unfortunately, 9 out of 10 times I have experienced the worst of the worst coaching. But yet, I offer a different perspective than I think most. Because you're lucky enough to have, for example, I think some coaches will have great players on their squad and they win all the time. But because of this external record, you're essentially considered in your profession to be a great coach just because of your record. And similarly, you could be a wonderful coach and teacher, but because of a lack of player talent sometimes, or luck, or other circumstances beyond your control, such as player injuries or your win-loss record's just mediocre, and as a consequence of this, you're seen as pretty much an ineffective coach. Sad but true, that's what it's come to. nowadays I think there needs to be a greater measurement protocol and standard, because coaches have such an impact on individuals and their lives. So I kind of, with that in mind, I want to take a look at what makes a really, really good coach. What kind of traits do the John Woodens or the Phil Jacksons? Phil Jackson's great because he says wisdom is always an overmatch for strength. And I love Phil Jackson because obviously he coached Michael Jordan, who inarguably is the greatest player to ever play. He's, Phil Jackson is the Zen master himself. He was also a holistic innovator and somewhat of a spiritual genius. He meshed basically philosophical creativity with a masterful triangle offense to create two different dynasties, both breathtaking in their own right. I mean, just a somber stare is all he basically puts off or exudes on the surface. It's really amazing. He is definitely his own great character in his own right. The Pat Summits, even the Red Auerbachs, Paul Brown. Paul Brown is way up there on my list. Even Don Shula and Scotty Bowman, who growing up, I grew up on Lake Erie, and I just can't help being so near to Toronto and Detroit and Pittsburgh for hockey to have such an influence. And Scotty Bowman's one of the all-time greats. How can you not like a coach who loved Barry Manilow, after all? And he really exhibited 3 decades of greatness. And, I also think of Bear Bryant and Vince Lombardi. And my personal favorite's John Wooden, because John Wooden is such a motivational figure on the court. Obviously, during his time at UCLA, he had a very unique way of inspiring his players with just a simple, calm approach to success. And one of my favorite quotes that he had is, "Ability is actually a poor man's wealth." They called him the Wizard of Westwood because he was beloved by his players and highly respected by his fans. And he's really the true definition of a hero because of everything he did to give back. And I just realized the majority of the great coaches I listed were men, but just to be fair, Pat Summitt was great. I believe she said, if you don't want responsibility, don't sit in the big seat. And I just love that quote because it exhibits taking personal accountability and stepping up into higher things, which most people typically make excuses, become victims, and run from. So, I think a great coach, if you're an athlete, then what follows will help you figure out how your own coach measures up as well. If you'll give some valuable information that will allow you to more intelligently evaluate how your coach conducts themselves in relation to you and your teammates, because in this way, it will give you the ability to better better reality test the coach-athlete situation that you currently find yourself in. It's quite often difficult for an athlete to really know if there's something wrong with him or her or the coach. Most often in emotional coach-athlete interactions, the athlete typically comes away feeling badly about him or herself. And hopefully the information that follows will help you better understand what is really going on and help you not blame yourself or beat yourself up for things that you really shouldn't. If you're a parent of an athlete, and please, by all means, if you're tuning in and listening to this, please forward this to an athlete or a parent or someone you might think would find this highly valuable. This discussion will help you get a good idea of what to look for when you shop around for a coach for your child, because that's really what it's come to. Coaches will have a direct and often life-lasting effect on you or your child, whether you want to admit or look at these facts or not. It really is the truth. So the more you can educate yourself and do research, the better off you're going to be. And how do the better coaches conduct themselves? How do they treat their athletes? These are things you want to look at. These are things you want to think about. How do they interact with you as a parent even? How do they deal with winning and losing? How do the better coaches even deal with mistakes and failures? They need to know these things. Parents need to be educated as much as possible about their child's sport and coaches in order to help their son or daughter have the best and happiest and fulfilling experiences possible. You know, if you're a coach, then this discussion will help you get a better sense of how the finest in this profession conduct themselves. And you'll learn which behaviors and characteristics will best motivate and inspire your players. I'm human performance enhancement specialist. I've been at this for 20 some odd years. And because of the horrible experiences I went through myself, I made it my mission and passion to research human behavior and coaching and performance and psychology and performance. And how do the really great teachers conduct themselves? You know, leadership's becoming a lost art. People taking self-accountability and let alone being leaders that help their environment, help others be greater than themselves is becoming a lost art. What is it about these great coaches and individuals that make them so successful? What are some specific things that you can learn from them that will help elevate you in the coaching ranks? And if you so choose, then you can use this list that I came up with that will help elevate you in the coaching ranks. And then you can work on making yourself that much better as a professional, because more better coaches and that take on the teaching and modeling role for the future are needed desperately. I think number one is the very best coaches get their athletes to believe in themselves. Good coaches inspire their players to do more than they think they can. In fact, all good teachers do this. All good leaders do this. They get their students or team or class or whoever to entertain possibilities that stretch the limits of their beliefs, to go way above and beyond. It's often misunderstood because people think it's a human phenomenon. To me, I think it's natural. But part of this involves building the athlete up rather than knocking them down. It's common sense. Good coaches always build self-esteem rather than undermine it. And this self-esteem building is not a gimmick, nor is it done artificially. In other words, the coach doesn't praise a mediocre effort, okay? He or she simply makes it a practice to catch their athletes doing things right. And they also convey through proper communication of what right is. John Wooden was tremendous at that. Phil Jackson's tremendous at that, of setting the standards, setting the high stakes, and responding with the athletes accordingly to get them to step up and into that space. The good coach doesn't get caught up in playing head games and leave the athletes questioning his or her abilities. I'd say number 2, the really effective coach does not use embarrassment and humiliation as a teaching tool. If you as a coach are so much into your ego, your narcissism, and you have to use this and you think it's an effective teaching tool, I think you should get out of the coaching business like yesterday. If you're a parent that knows of a coach, or if you're a player that has such a coach, I think you need to go to the administration or to the college or the AD, whoever, and let it be known, because this is embarrassment and humiliation. It just leads to destruction of an individual at the end of the day, and that, I think, is crossing the barrier of harming an individual some way, shape, or form. It's not making them any better. And that's not the point of coaching. It's abuse in one way, shape, or form. By law, that is abuse. The greats, they all understand human emotion, and they have high emotional quotient. They understand that embarrassing or humiliating a young athlete for mistake or failure or shortcoming is an aggressive assault on that athlete. And it's crossing borders on so many levels that it certainly doesn't build mental toughness, and it certainly doesn't enhance performance at the end of the day. And there's nothing educational or constructive about it. That's just a narcissistic, egotistical pursuit on the coach's behalf. And they should be terminated effectively and immediately. This type of behavior exhibited, it tears down that athlete and grossly undermines their self-esteem and creates performance problems. When you create performance problems, those are long-lasting, especially with serious athletes. It will last a lifetime. Great coaches are great life teachers. Good coach understands that what he or she is teaching goes far above and beyond just the X's and O's. This kind of coach does not just teach the skills and techniques in strategy within the narrow confines of the sport, okay? Instead, he or she looks for opportunities where the more important life lessons can be taught, such as mastering hardship or handling and rebounding from failures and setbacks, and trusting your teammates and what makes a great teammate, or sacrificing individual needs for the benefit of the group, emotionally dealing with winning and losing, how to exhibit good sportsmanship and fair play and honesty and ethics and integrity and values, so on and so forth. The best coaches keep the game in perspective. Don't get distracted by how big any one game is in relation to their job as a teacher, as a leader, as a position of power. They understand that sports are just games, and they're merely a vehicle to teach others, to serve others, and just the more important life lessons to enrich others' lives. And they understand that what they teach and how they teach it will have an impact on the student that goes far beyond the sport. If you want to see the all-time greats, watch what their players are doing post-athletic career. And that will be a reflection of the coaching that they've received, unless it's a very, very rare circumstance that individual spends the remainder of their years reinvesting themselves and working just as hard on their life as they did their sport in personal development, but that's less than 1% in its own. So I would say great coaches don't let their egos and self-worth get tied up in the outcome. The best coaches are mentally healthy enough to know that they're not their performances, in regardless of what others around them may say. They don't feel diminished as an individual when their teams fail, nor do they feel that much better about themselves when their squads succeed either. Very humble and very balanced in that regard. These individuals understand that coaching is only one thing of many that they do, and therefore they don't let this one solely define themselves as a person. Coaches who get in trouble with their athletes do so because they're emotionally more vulnerable and tend to feel threatened by a loss or failure, or just plain selfish, egotistical, and psychologically unstable. In all reality, their egos are on the line whenever these individuals compete, and therefore they feel like they have much more to lose. And many blatant coaching mistakes come directly from the coach's overemphasis on the game's outcome, because that individual's self-esteem is too caught up with the outcome, also known as ego. Great coaches also understand that the individual differences in their athletes are exactly that, individual. And the best coaches have a basic understanding that each athlete on their team is different in attitude, or personality, or responsibility, and sensitivity, and how they handle criticism and adversity. These coaches take the time to get to know each athlete's individual differences and styles. Phil Jackson had the Bulls meditate. I mean, he had Dennis Rodman, for sakes, on his team. How are you going to calm that down? But he learned to value their individual differences and bring them together. And John Wooden, you ever read anything about John Wooden? What amazes me most is how he remembers acute details of every single one of his championship team's members, and you know, it's really amazing. I just think that type of recollection after all those years says a lot for anyone. And then they also hand tailor what they say to and how they treat this athlete to achieve the maximum coaching effectiveness. They know that while one athlete may also respond well to like a hard edge, some need that, and maybe a raised voice, which, don't get me wrong, I need raised voice and a hard edge sometimes, but there's a time and they understand when that is, rather than constantly putting it on that may totally shut another person down. So the best coaches coach the person, not just the athlete. The really effective coaches take the time to get to know the athlete as a person. You know, they don't judge or compare. They just take an interest in the athlete's life off the field, or court, track. And their passion is really in creating a system to make that individual better. It's their job. That's the real job of a coach. They don't see personal, academic, or social problems as a distraction to the job of coaching. They view the outside problems as rather an opportunity to further build a relationship with the athlete. That's how one is molded. It's this kind of caring. It's never lost on the athlete. The coaches who take an interest in the athlete's total life are more trusted and respected than those who don't. And as a result, the coaches or the greats who really care about the athlete as a person find that their athletes are more motivated and they actually work harder. You can't ever separate the athlete as a performer from who he or she is as a person. And the greats understand that. No, another characteristic of the greats is the best coaches are flexible. They approach their teaching by continuously looking for a better way to reach an athlete And then when an athlete struggles to learn something, the better coaches, the great coaches, the masterful world-class coaches do not look at this as a learning disability and blame the athlete for their incompetence. Instead, they approach it as a teaching opportunity, and therefore they change how they're presenting the material to that athlete. So if one approach doesn't work, then they try another until they figure out the best way to reach that particular athlete. And just because an athlete may not be responding to your coaching doesn't mean that he or she is an attitude commitment problem or so-called learning disability. By the way, if anyone ever throws that around, a learning disability, if you as a coach think that's funny, or you as a player think you need to tolerate that, I think a coach should be let go immediately. Just on so many issues and standards nowadays, I think we've evolved past the militant 1940s resolute to undermining an individual as much as possible, because coaches who are rigid, who continually adopt the attitude that it's my way or the highway, are far less effective than those coaches who have mastered the fine art of being flexible. And they usually have a high emotional quotient. Also, understand here, okay, that flexibility does not mean being wishy-washy. You can be flexible and strong at the same time. I also think a great, I'd say it's way up there on the list. You simply have to be a tremendous communicator. And this is often misunderstood. Great communicators, they understand that communication is a two-way street. And that means it involves a back and forth, between coach and athlete. Bad coaches think that communication is a one-way street. Trust me, I've seen it all. I've been there. I've seen horrible coaches, and I've been unfortunately, part of probably safe to say the receiving end of some of the worst coaches in the history of basketball, which probably explains what I'm doing today. But, you talk and the athletes listen. Instead, effective communication, this really entails that you as a coach carefully listen to what your athletes are saying. And when your athletes talk, you must be quiet inside so that you can listen. Unless you carefully listen to them when they talk, then you won't have a clue as to what your athletes are really saying or what the best way is to help them. Far too many coaches are too busy countering in their head what their athletes are saying to actually hear them. And if you can't learn how to listen, then you'll never truly be effective in reaching your players, and you shouldn't even be in coaching in the first place. Just get out while you can, okay? If your ego is so big as to you have to control every situation, just pack your bags, pack your office, and leave the profession, please. Do us all a favor and just get out. Seriously. Good coaches take the time to listen to and educate their athletes' parents as well. They make it a regular practice to communicate with the parents, and they also educate them about the sport and the role that they need to play on the team. It's very important. That is effective communication, and I love it. Your success as a coach, it often depends upon getting the parents to work with you, not against you. And the only way to make this happen is if you take the time to communicate, to talk, to train your parents, and convey what your expectations are for the team and your son or daughter individually as well. This means that you have to learn to listen to their concerns and questions. But take a proactive role with them. Step up and just be a higher leader. And do not wait for a problem or crisis before you decide that it's time to actually approach your parents. So do so right from the beginning of the season and do it often. Always update your communication, because there's no such thing as over communicating. Let them know about their support role on the team. Help them understand that their job's not to motivate or coach their child. Okay, that needs to be clear. Teach them what are appropriate and inappropriate behaviors at games and on the sidelines, and certainly educate them about the sport and what it takes to excel. It's amazing how many parents have these overachieving kids, and yet the parent doesn't really get it. So explain your philosophy about competition and the playing time, and then be open to feedback in a non-defensive manner. The great ones, the good coaches, they walk the talk with their athletes and parents. And what this means is good coaches know that what you say and how you act are congruent. Your most powerful teaching tool is modeling. And then the great ones operate on the principle that their actions and how they conduct themselves will always speak much louder than your words. Therefore, they actively model the behaviors and attitude that they want the players to adopt. Great coaches keep the learning environment emotionally safe. They really understand that the emotional climate on the team, it dramatically affects how players practice and perform, okay? They make their job to directly and immediately deal with the scapegoating or bullying or ostracism and petty jealousies that sometimes arise between players, and hopefully it's just sometimes and not oftentimes. They give a very clear message that cruelty and mistreatment and bullying of others, it won't be tolerated, and it counters the mission of the team. And as a consequence, this kind of coach, the great coaches, they create an atmosphere of safety on the team that's absolutely crucial for optimal learning and peak performance and building the self-esteem and culture of a winning culture. Great coaches continually challenge their athletes to do better and push their limits. They inspire their athletes. They motivate their athletes to become believers in themselves, and by continually putting them in situations which challenge their limiting beliefs. They don't allow their players to just get by with the status quo. They do this by pushing their athletes outside of their comfort zone physically, mentally, emotionally, and then they help them discover that in the fact that they can do better than they first believed they could. They teach what's the saying? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. They're masters at this principle, which basically states that the only way to grow physically and emotionally is to constantly challenge yourself to do things that aren't easy and to lessen their resistance by going into the storm. In this way, they refuse to tolerate mediocrity in effort and attitude and technique and training or performance. They're masters at it. They're masters at motivating and instilling those skills. The best coaches are continually challenging themselves. They're continually students themselves. They model the attitudes and behaviors they want their players to adopt. They maintain a beginner's mind when it comes to their professional development. And they understand that regardless of how much success they may have had in the past, for example, doing things their own way, they can always learn new and better ways. There's a humility and humbleness in that. And in these ways, these coaches continually step out of their comfort zone as the experts and put themselves in more uncomfortable position as the beginner and learner. Because these are the coaches that walk the walk and demand from their athletes exactly what they demand from themselves. And their athletes are far more motivated to meet the coach's higher expectations. Pretty simple psychology. The very best coaches are passionate about what they do. These are the coaches that know that passion or love is the high test fuel and that fire in the belly that will power you over obstacles, beyond setbacks, and through frustration until you achieve success. And their passion is infectious. It's motivational. It's inspiring. Great coaches are empathetic and tune into feelings of their players. They have this innate ability to communicate to their athletes that they truly understand them. When you're empathetic and you leave your athlete feeling that you, as their coach, deeply understands, this goes a long way in building the athlete's loyalty, the self-esteem, and certainly motivation. So that they wake up in the morning even more motivated than ever before and give you their best, and they keep improving in sports and life. Keep in mind that being empathetic doesn't necessarily mean that you're an emotional pushover, okay? You can have the ability to understand where your players are coming from and still make the coaching decisions that you feel are necessary. But coaches who lack the ability or don't take the time to tune into the emotions of their athletes because they mistakenly believe that all this emotional crap is a total waste and it's a sign of weakness or more or less, and all these attitudes that exhibit a lesser, weaker, whatever you want to call it. It's garbage. It ends up inadvertently undermining their best coaching efforts. Getting to the bottom of my list here, I'll wrap this up very quickly. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Great coaches are honest and they conduct themselves with integrity. They know that their most powerful teaching tool is coaching, is, again, modeling. They also know that how they conduct themselves in relation to their athletes or the parents or the opponents and the refs, the fans and the media is never, ever lost in their players. They're honest and they demonstrate character and class in everything that they do. That's why I love John Wooden so much. He exhibited all those traits. It's really, really become a lost art. The best coaches make the sport fun for their athletes, and they realize that sports are just games. At the end of the day, a sport's just a game. It's amazing that I think 95% have lost the overall sight of what sports even are. Games are meant to be fun. The best coaches find creative ways to integrate this fun into whatever they do over the course of the season on a daily basis in practice and during competitions. When an athlete's enjoying themselves, that athlete's loose and relaxed and they can perform at their highest. Because since loose and relaxed are two of the most critical ingredients to peak performance, it's in your best interest, if you're a coach, to find those innovative ways to keep your athletes smiling. Great coaches are not defensive in their interactions with their players or parents. And they understand that the part of being a good communicator is that you have to be open to negative feedback and criticism, because it's within this feedback they're the seeds to becoming a better and more successful coach. Great coaches use their athletes' mistakes and failures as valuable teaching opportunities, and they know their athletes need to be, again, relaxed and loose, out of fight or flight, in order to play to their best potential, and that a fear of making a mistake will always undermine this relaxed state. Relaxed and loose is extremely important. I think the biggest secret to you playing your best if you're a player. When it counts the most is learning how to keep yourself calm and composed. Because if you allow yourself to get too nervous or too excited right before or during a competition, then your muscles will tighten up. You'll lose your confidence from overthinking. You'll play, your play will essentially go right down the tubes. This is actually what it means to choke. And, as an athlete, if you're getting so nervous that you end up performing tight and tentatively in your head, you're going to be a mere shadow of your normal self. So to end, the great coaches give their athletes permission to fail and make mistakes. They basically instill in their players the understanding that mistakes and failures are nothing more than feedback about what you did wrong, and specifically about what you need to do differently next time. Because one of the bigger teaching mistakes that coaches make is to get angry and impatient and yell and cuss and scream and throw stuff. That's just amateur hour. There's nothing great in any of those traits. With their athletes when they mess up or fail. This response to your athlete's mistakes will actually ensure that they'll make plenty more of them. Knowing that your coach gets impatient and angry when you make mistakes will only cause you to worry about this while you're performing, and you don't want that. All of that hard work and sacrifice and time and energy only to lessen your performance. Get out if you have a jerk for a coach that exhibits the traits that are making you lesser of a person. Best coaches teach that failure is a feedback, okay? And feedback is ultimately the breakfast of champions. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. I hope you got a lot out of that. And again, if you know of an athlete, maybe you're an athlete, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a teacher, maybe you have a high leadership position and you enjoyed this episode, please get this in the hands. Share this episode with an athlete, a coach, a parent of an athlete, a professional athlete. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and professionally on LinkedIn and Twitter. I am under all those accounts are under Frederick Intamin. It'd be great to connect with you, and please stay tuned for my next show next week, same time, 10 a.m. every Friday. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. Listen every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern to Frederick Intamin host Mind, Body, Life. Connect with Frederick at www.globalvoiceradio.com. Tune in next week for another edition of Mind, Body, Life on Global Voice Radio.